want to come here and talk on this subject because you could say I've disadopted research in this area in the last 5 or 6 years, and the reasons might become apparent as you listen to what I've got to say. There was drought. It was a pretty bad stage. And there was a contract that was being discussed where extension service deliverers, if we'll call them that, were failing to meet their milestones of achieving targets for perennial pasture sowing in those conditions. Now, it's all very well to talk about Samaritan's dilemmas, but that's one of the outcomes you get when you have thoughtless adherence to milestones and outcomes and purchaser-provider relationships. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the dilemmas for that way of thinking about the world with dealing with the social contract of advice. The farmers that dot in the middle, and he saw that there are 3 levels of engagement that people could have in the decision making that the farmer was going through. And the outside was information, just information. On the inside circle, support, that's essentially intimates, family, that's where they're the people who bear the consequences of the decisions you make. So they have a right to be involved in deciding whether to take those risks. And in the middle, the grey middle circle is evaluation, where you toss around all the information, try and make sense of it. The word sense making is now very trendy in practice change research. This, in a sense, was the first sense-making research in Australian extension. What he did was track the movement of farmers in their search for information and clarity across these circles. And you can see an idealised version of what was going on there. It just shows moving from himself out to some information on the outside of the circle, coming back in to talk about it with the family, then back out for some more information on the outside, then back into the family, then trying to make sense of it, coming back into that evaluation circle in the middle, and then back to himself making the decision. Now, I'm just going to show you 2 striking different outcomes from that sort of tracking. This was a simple decision. This was whether to change the fencing layout for part of the farm. So you can see there aren't many steps there. Now this next one I'm going to show you is the other extreme. It was a decision to buy land and to build a new shed to milk the extra cattle, new dairy shed to milk the extra cattle that would be on the farm because of that extra land. How do you make sense of it? And the sense making occurred in that middle step, in that middle circle. The movements into there were not many, but they were extremely strategic. Now the interesting question is, if you're trying to encourage a complex decision to be made on a farm, where do you want to be in influencing that decision? And how can you be? Which circle can you be in? You obviously can't be an intimate unless it's your own family, but there are 2 other places to be. Now, I'm going to shift and just give an example of one of these sorts of decisions that I was involved in researching with Kieran Ranson about 15 years ago. I didn't really understand what was going on, so I sat Kieran down one day and asked him to talk me through. I grilled him about the implications of adopting lucerne on a property in our region. And this was my making sense of it. We were promoting it because of dryland salinity. But if you looked at what it actually meant on the farm, you had to deal with establishment risks, undersowing, whether to sow new crops because of the undersowing implications, changed grazing management, changed fencing, water reticulation, changed mob structure, compromises with cropping flexibility, new weed and fleece quality issues because of the grazing rotation, greater stocking intensity, increased flock size maybe, management of parasite burden. I could keep going, I'm not going to read them all, but you can just see the summaries. The shifting emphasis from wool to meat was an almost inevitable outcome, redesigning the farm calendar, changing the cropping strategy, a new look at marketing, and managing all that change, particularly the financial implications of it and the risk. And we were up there saying, do this because of salinity, which partly explains why I'm a disadopter of research in this area. I felt a little uneasy about that sort of social contract that it implies. Because if you come into something like that and you're an information source just dealing with one thing like salinity, if you're not irrelevant, you're very close to it. If you're going to be in the inner circle, helping make sense of that, that requires you to have a broader perspective. And now I'm going to jump to another piece of research I found very useful. It's even older, by a bloke called Anderson from what was Hawkesbury College. He looked at farmers' attitudes to advisors. I'm not talking just government advisors, I'm not talking just private, I'm talking about advisors, sources of information in general. What was valued? The advisor or agent or consultant or client, not client, consultant is seen by the farmer as serving the farmer's interests, is sympathetic, is there to help solve problems, is practical rather theoretical. Now, you could sum that up probably in one word, which is another laggard moment, trust. If you're trusted, it's because you're seen as respecting the position that the other side of the relationship is coming from, and that you respect their values and their objectives. If you're there to change their attitudes, you're not going to be in the middle circle. That was another thing that I used to rail against years ago when I was in this, was changing attitudes as the objective of extension. But just add to this mix climate change, tightening food supply chain, and it suggests that resilience is going to become even more important, or has become more important. And I'm left with the sense that expecting landscape scale change for conservation with the existing farm community for at least half the landscape is a pipe dream. And so it comes a matter of values, really, about, this is where I'm going to finish with values on this one. Are you really that interested in landscape change? And what sort of landscape change are you talking about? Are you talking about a cultural landscape change, or are you talking about a biological landscape change? Now, the message from that picture is, for the bottom half, it's got dry, so look before you dive. The people who might dive in there are those that have got the money. Adoption is more likely to come from change in ownership, I suspect. And I'm not talking about the next generation taking over. I'm talking about large-scale farms being built up in some of these areas as the older generation sells out to them. I'm picking up some interesting stories at the moment as I travel around talking to farm groups in Victoria. Just a few in the last week that I've had raised to me. Some I'd heard of them before, but I'm still picking up information. But a carbon trading company that's buying out sheep producers, wool producers, and converting their land to forest. Super company buying land for canola. There's a super company with my money buying dairy farms and talking about renovating landscapes to fit catchment plans as well. That's what it might take. But the implications for that is changed communities in those areas, and that's very, very sensitive, very, very political, and often very unwelcome from the existing community. So we're talking about community reciprocity in this situation. I don't think the reciprocity is ever going to extend to doing away with the communities that people live in. So I think we've got a dilemma, and I don't see the solution. But that might explain why I've disadopted research in this area. Thank you.